Hey there, welcome to another episode of Life Design Plus, where we are mastering the art of living your authentic life. I just wrapped up this conversation with Devin Martin, and it was absolutely amazing. I'll keep the intro short and sweet so we can get to that. Before I tell you more about Devin, I want to encourage you to hit the show notes down below. There are some other podcast appearances of his that I want to highlight because I did not ask Devin about his story. He's got a great story, but he's told it a number of times, and I felt like I could use that 15-20 minutes of him telling his story to get other information out of him and have a better conversation. So if you want to hear more of Devin's backstory, you can visit his website, but also check the podcast episodes I shared below, and that will fill in some of the gap that I intentionally skipped over so we could get more of this great conversation since he's given that before. So with that, Devin is the founder of Lifestyle Integrity, where he is a life and executive coach. The work that he's doing, from everything that I've listened to and read, is very similar to the work I want to be doing in Life Design Plus. We each do it our own way, have a little bit different processes, but at the end of the day, the outcome and the goal is the same. So this episode was special because I got an opportunity to talk to somebody who I respect and look up to in the work that he's doing, and that's really cool. But on top of that, I have this great conversation that you all get a chance to hear and learn from, and hopefully, I'd say pay more attention to the awareness that you have in your life. That'll make more sense once you get into the episode, but a theme you're going to hear is awareness. As I always like to ask, if you wouldn't mind, take a moment, pause right now, pause midway through, after you get done, head to the comments and let Devin know what about this conversation resonated with you, what's something you're going to change, what's something that changed your mind, what really stood out to you, so he knows that his time spent with me was not wasted. It impacted at least one person beyond me. It impacted me, but it impacted somebody else out there, because that's what we all want. We want to come on these podcasts. We want to share things that we know to help other people, in this case, move closer to their authentic life or find lifestyle integrity, as Devin would say. So take a moment, leave a comment. I would greatly appreciate it. All right. With that, let's get to this conversation with Devin Martin. Have you ever read The Map of Consciousness Explained by David Hawkins?
No, I read a different David Hawkins book.
He's got
I forget
one.
which one it
Letting
was.
Go is one. He's got another one like Power and Force.
I think I read Power and
Okay.
Force. Yeah.
So I think he talks about the map of consciousness, but that's kind of what I want to kick off with. Is in this book, there was something that he talked about that was eye-opening for me. And to summarize it, and it'll kind of kick off this conversation about consciousness, because that's where I want to start. He did a study on two doctors. Dr. A had a high level of consciousness based off of his scale. Dr. B had low level. Patients had the same ailments, gave them the same prescriptions and treatments, and the only difference was the elevated consciousness and lower consciousness. And the Dr. A, his patients all healed, and Dr. B, his patients did not. So in this study, maybe there's other variables that we don't know, but it was consciousness was the only difference, and that was the impact that the doctor had on his patients. And so in my mind was working was, well, is there a way to connect that, to financial planning, to me being an advisor? Could it be said that advisors with higher levels of consciousness can have better outcomes on their clients? I guess you could put that across all professions. So with that being said,
Yeah.
I know that you have done a lot with consciousness. You've talked about it before in other podcasts. When you hear the word consciousness, like what does that mean to you? And then I guess we'll kind of go from there.
The first thing that brought up for me was I've read multiple studies that show that when a patient trusts their doctor, they heal more. And I think it's a combination of things. I think you could logistically nail it down probably a little bit to compliance, meaning they're just following through with the doctor's advice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also whatever you want to call the placebo effect, which is like belief does something to our physiology. The mind-body connection is massive. And so I think when a doctor resonates at a high level of consciousness, that entrains us, we can kind of get wrapped up in there, and we can enter an elevated state of consciousness when we're around them.
Mm-hmm.
B, I think we surrender more, we relax more, we go out of anxiety and stress and into present moment awareness, which is really healthy. And then C, I think, there's something else we probably follow through. And then there's also probably something else magical that happens when we go, okay, I'm going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's got this. We've got this. And then you actually start healing yourself. Yeah. And so, what is consciousness? I mean, I've often said my purpose is to help raise the consciousness of those whose decisions have the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so There's many ways to slice up consciousness. One way is just like, what are you aware of? And the more aware you are, the more conscious you are. I'm a big fan. Hawkins' work is interesting, but it kind of fits into a broader context for me. I think Ken Wilber's work, Integral Philosophy, is the biggest context holder I know of. Some people call him a philosopher, some people call him a map maker. And so when he talks about consciousness, he has an aqua model. There's 5 components: states, stages, levels, lines, and types. Mm-hmm. And so we could talk about states of conscious. Every day we go from waking to dreaming to deep dreamless sleep, and those correlate with spirituality of the states of consciousness. But then we could talk about stages of consciousness. So as you grow, you evolve. And you can slice that up many ways, but let's just say stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5. The higher up you are, the more conscious you are, the more you're aware, the more perspectives you can take. But then we could slice that up again, and we could say, well, there's lines of development. Your spiritual line of development is different than your cognitive line of development, which is different than your kinesthetic, and morals is a lines of development, values is a lines of development. And so, we could keep really slicing it up. And so if you want to get nuanced, you would kind of look like, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? Where do I want to invest? Where do I want to grow? Where am I deficient? Mm-hmm. And then shadow is a huge component of this. What are my blind spots? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm at a very high stage in a bunch of lines of development, but there's a part of me that's still acting like a 3-year-old because I was traumatized when I was little. Mm-hmm. And anytime somebody says this one thing, I immediately regress. And I become, a brat, and I'm throwing a temper tantrum, and I'm trying to be controlling, and so we have to look at that and heal. And so I guess we could also, if we really want to make this confusing, we could just say everything happens within consciousness. It is all consciousness, and so it's a huge topic, and I'm happy to dive in anywhere, but that kind of gives you a sense of how I start to look at it.
And I think it's a great overview and gives us lots of areas to go. When I think about trying to get people to think about their consciousness, I don't know if people are aware of it. I think I don't know if everybody. I don't want to say everybody's walking around sleeping and not knowing, but I don't think people really are thinking about their consciousness and the different levels and what that attracts to you. And I don't know if you have a belief of kind of the level of consciousness you're at and the energy you're putting out brings that to you, but both of us have a desire to help people find greater happiness, find fulfillment, find purpose, for me, find their authentic life. And I don't think that you're able to do that without elevating your consciousness. But if you're not aware of consciousness, how do you elevate it?
Yeah. I mean, and you could, it's a kind of clunky terminology, but it points to what consciousness growth looks like. In psychology, they often say when the subject of one level becomes the object of the subject of the next level, that is growth. So the way I like to describe it is, I am angry. That used to be me. I used to be fucking anger. It would consume me, and there would be nothing but blind rage, and I was the rage. Now I'm aware of anger. It exists within me, but at the same time it's arising. There's some fear, there's some sadness, there's some hope, there's my body, there's other people, there's a whole lot more room around it. So now I've taken the sadness and the anger and the rage and all of that, and I can objectify it. I can stand outside of it and be conscious of it. And I feel so consciousness is constantly stepping back. The second we think, oh, now I'm conscious, well, we've just become fused with some higher level perhaps, but there's still another step we're going to take back later. And until you're permanently in non-dual awareness, one with all things, and functioning in the relative, which is always changing. So you got to keep up, so basically nobody's ever fully 100% conscious all the time. So we're always becoming more conscious, and we can always look like one step behind us and be like, oh, those people aren't conscious, but now I am. But then we forget that there's a lot of steps ahead of us, and maybe we're one step ahead on one line of development, but we're 5 steps behind on another line of development. And so I think we have to be careful there.
No, that's helpful. And in this talk of consciousness, you mentioned spirituality a couple of times. And I know that, from being on your website and listening to your episodes that you've been on other podcasts, you talk about spirituality a lot. In the work that you're doing, And again, I've introed you so everybody knows what you're doing. I encourage them to go listen to other podcasts to hear your backstory. Not that I want to slight your backstory, but you've told it multiple times, and I'd rather
Yeah.
spend 20 minutes on other things. So so they hopefully will be getting your backstory somewhere else. But spirituality and the work that you do, and maybe a little bit in spirituality for yourself, how does that become so important?
It's funny. Consciousness is probably the reason why I've always been obsessed with how people's minds work. How do we make sense of reality? Why do we seem to focus on certain things? Why do we seem to leave other things out? And the Western world is kind of slowly making progress here, psychology, philosophy, and things like that. But if you look at the Eastern traditions, if you look at Buddhism, for me in particular, these people are masterful in understanding how the mind works. I mean, they've spent thousands of years, and they're not using, external sensors to measure the components of your brain. They're using the mind itself to look at the mind. So they're deeply introspecting.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happens that if you do that, if you look at your mind with your mind long enough, the place you end up is what we call spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
You start to understand consciousness as something and reality as something very different than the Western materialistic frame would posit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I didn't realize that I was spiritual. I was raised a fourth generation atheist who was just deeply curious. And I had a couple of crazy experiences, a random out of body experience listening to classical music when I was little, a really profound experience of emptiness on LSD when I was, about 18. And I had no context and no understanding for like, what is going on in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then I stumbled upon Ken Wilber's work, and he pointed me towards mysticism, which is the core of all the religious traditions. There's, Christian mystics and Jewish mystics, and in Islam there are mystics, and in Buddhism there's certainly mystics. And so that made me start to think, oh, maybe I'm still not religious, but maybe I am spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we get confused thinking that spirituality has to mean some kind of dogma or belief system or some ritualistic behavior. But to me, it's just what happens when you have an interest in absolute reality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you were to ask ultimate questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? I think that just puts you into a spiritual context.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned religion, and I think that spirituality and religion, I think people think they can't coexist. Like you can only be one or the other, and I think that's part of kind of like the system of religion. But I grew up Catholic, and I would still identify as Catholic because that's what my family's always been. But I think like when I think of myself, I would say I'm more spiritual because I'm not leaning towards like the teachings of the church. I'm leaning more towards like there's something much bigger that I'm a smaller part of. And to me, that pulls me more on the spiritual side. It doesn't mean I don't believe in God. But I think they can coexist. And I think so many people miss the opportunity potentially to explore their spirituality and get those deeper answers because they're so stuck in the religion that they're following, realizing that I think at the root of the religion is spirituality.
Yeah, and I think ideally what some people's experience of religion is missing is that you ideally have direct experience of some transcendence, something context greater than yourself. And so it's possible that that can happen in church. It's possible it can happen in temple. There was actually a book maybe 15, 20 years ago that made the claim that most people's number one most transcendent experience in their life happened at giant sports venues. And I think they were talking about Fenway Park originally. And so imagine everybody's here. We're all focused on the same exact thing happening. We're all charged with emotion. We may even be breathing in unison. We're all jumping to our feet and getting excited at the same moment. I mean, that's transcendent. That's being part of something greater than yourself. And I think it can sneak up on you. And people can have unbelievably spiritual experiences, watching a competitive sporting event. And then they were saying, but they could also go to church every single week for 10 years and never have anything like that. Now, if you've heard like great Baptist singing or, been a part of deep prayer or maybe some dancing, like there are some places where this happens in church, but just being lectured is probably not going to get most people there. But I think it's important. We need direct experiences of things. I don't think you should believe what anyone else says. I'm more of like an Emerson on this one. It's great to listen to a Buddhist or a monk or anybody, and maybe there's some good ideas there, but you should go check it out for yourself. You should be curious and you should be skeptical, but not cynical.
one of my first talks I gave in my series last fall was encouraging people to ask why. Like, why do you believe what you believe? And if you are honest and then you keep asking why a few times, you begin to realize that you don't even know why you believe what you believe, other than that's just what you were told. And it might not even be anything that really truly you believe. But I think people are afraid to ask why because A, they may realize that what they believed was not really true. And then now you have this, okay, then what else am I believing that I don't believe in? And who am I? And I look at asking why as a win-win. One of two things can happen. One, you discover that what you believe, you truly believe, because you can tail it all the way back to it's a core belief of yours. And now you know. Or the scarier one is you realize it's not what you believe. And now you have the opportunity to go figure out what you really believe and get move closer to the authentic version of yourself. So I think asking why is a win-win. There's no losing in that question.
I agree, but like you said, it is scary
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. Uh, I mean, I went through a major dark night of the soul, and that for me was the experience of everything I do believe in, and my whole understanding of how to believe in anything was ripped from me.
Mm-hmm.
Not just seeing through the specific concepts that I happen to believe in at the moment, but seeing through the mind's ability to create concepts and
Mm-hmm.
realizing that all concepts distance me from the ultimate reality and leaving and without a spiritual container, because at the time I had no context, everything became fundamentally meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, if it has no absolute meaning, then all relative meaning is groundless. How do I move forward?
Mm-hmm.
How do I have a vision for a life that will be meaningful if everything is fundamentally meaningless?
Mm-hmm.
And so I slipped into nihilism, and I had to find mysticism and a proper spirituality to realize that, in the emptiness, you can find immense fullness. There
Mm-hmm.
is deep relative meaning is still valuable,
Mm-hmm.
even if it has no absolute significance. And so, like, I'm using a lot of words right now, which if you have that experience are all useless and meaningless. But it's terrifying to, also for a lot of people I work with, the scarier thing is just losing community.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with very religious Jewish people who grew up, and if they start to doubt Judaism, every single person in their family and every single person they've ever met in their life and had a real relationship with may suddenly be taken away from them
Mm-hmm.
because they don't believe in the same worldview anymore. And so if you start to really question things, I started questioning, like, do I believe in capitalism? Do I
Mm-hmm.
believe in the education system? Do I believe in anything that do I believe in sports? Do I think this is all starts to feel really ridiculous?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be incredibly isolating,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's good to have people around you in a community you can talk to about this stuff. And that's why, like, your podcast, being a coach, being a mentor to people is so important because you can kind of hold their hand and say, like, it's all falling apart and don't worry, it's going to come back together in a much bigger context and it's going to feel great. But you're just going to have to feel lost for a little while first.
Mm-hmm. I want to stay on that comment. Does somebody have to be lost? Does somebody have to have a traumatic event to kind of be able to find themselves?
No, they don't have to. Most people need it though.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, like I've always said, I love it when people come to me seeking coaching out of abundance. When they say my life is great, I want more. I actually just this past week had a guy, and I said this to him. I said, "Oh my God, this is so refreshing." He's never worked with a coach. Somebody very close to him finally convinced him to work with a coach. He said, "I think this would be great for you." And we talked about every area of his life. I mean, incredibly wealthy, great family, a lot of friends, a lot of hobbies, a lot of interesting creativity in his life, very spiritual. And he's like, "Yeah, my life is great." And I said, "So what are you doing here?" And he's like, "I want more. I think there's more possible." And I can tell you that's like 1 out of 100 of the people who reach out to me. Most people, I just got off the phone now, the guy who, like, 15 years in a career, and all of a sudden he was blindsided by the CEO and does not have the role and the trajectory he thought he was on anymore. And then and that's forced him to pause and go, "Wait a minute, I don't have a life outside of work. I was able to think everything was going great when everything at work was going great. But now when I think about it, like, I don't have an hour for myself all week. It's all obligations to other people." And then, and I lost my mother recently, he said, and, like, that was a huge wake up call. And so most people, I think, unfortunately, grow through pain way more than pleasure. But I do think both paths are rich and valuable, and you can choose fullness. I chose emptiness as a path to spirituality. You can choose fullness.
That's refreshing to hear because I would, if I was going to, if I'm being honest with what I think, about myself, I would be more like the guy who came to you in abundance. And I think
Mm.
I've always been that way. So I don't know if you had a chance to meet Matt Ziegler yet, but he's the one who connected me to Tom, which made me find you. And so he's a very important
Ah.
role in on this. And I was on a show with him and another guy who works in finance, and the conversation was about, do you have to go through traumatic events? And the other gentleman went through a traumatic event of 9/11, being there, everything that came from that. And I was on the other end where, knock on wood, like there haven't been major traumatic events. And I've talked to other people and asked them, like I asked Tom Morgan the same question. And I feel like most of the time we hear about it coming from trauma, but I do think you can get there. I've never would have thought about calling it through abundance, but I do think you get there through abundance. And I hope that through the podcast and me sharing my story, that for those that are kind of moving in that abundant path, they don't feel like they have to find that trauma and go create trauma when they could have just stayed on the positive path. So
Yeah.
not that we know for sure, but it's refreshing to know that somebody with your experience and your perspective says, yes, you can get there with abundance.
Yeah, and I think that the second half of my, or at least the past 10 years of my life, I've been more of the abundance route. You know,
Hmm.
like I had things have been good, and I have been challenging myself, and you know, and then sometimes you create pain just because you're tinkering. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
life is good. I've got a great career. I don't know. Maybe I'll blow it up. Maybe I'll try something new, and maybe it'll work out. Maybe it'll fail. Either way, it's going to be struggle.
Hmm.
But I think it's also part of the challenge here is not being too attached to any momentary emotion or sensation.
Hmm.
You know, it's part of this is taking a bigger perspective.
Hmm.
You know, would you want a life that was free from pain? I wouldn't.
Hmm.
I wouldn't know pleasure. I wouldn't know anything. And I think pain is a teacher. You know, and the faster you pay attention to it, the quicker it shifts.
Hmm.
Fear is the problem more than pain. You know, something hurts. I feel like fear is an amplifier. It makes it hurt longer and louder.
Hmm.
But if you can just be with the pain, there's a message and there's something you should do. Like if you step on a tack, pick up your foot. You know, if going to work makes your energy dip, change something about the way you go to work.
Hmm.
You know, and if
Hmm.
you avoid it, then the pain gets bigger and louder and bigger and louder. And some people are 30 years of avoiding pain. And then they have this big traumatic event and they go, oh, it woke me up and I had to change things. And it's like, well, yeah, you needed a really loud message.
Right.
But if you sit and meditate or you do something to increase your awareness, your consciousness, what you start to notice is things become subtler.
Hmm.
You don't need to be hit over the head to notice something. You notice it when it's very small. Like when I used to get in fist fights when I was a kid, I wouldn't notice my anger till I was swinging.
Hmm.
Now my heart rate elevates slightly, or my blood pressure changes slightly, or I get flushed, my body temperature changes, or my thoughts start to turn towards a certain tone. I'm noticing that, and that could be 5 days before I would have gotten into a fight.
Hmm.
And at that point, I take a deep breath and it changes, you know?
Hmm.
And so I think it depends on how subtle your awareness is. And so if people nowadays are getting into consciousness and learning how to make their awareness more subtle, my hope is that we all will need less pain to start changing.
Hmm. A theme throughout this is awareness. Like I've always liked that word, but the more I hear you talk about it, the more I appreciate it even more, because that, to your point, it brings you to the solution or where you need to go a lot quicker. And I recently was talking to somebody, and I don't remember where I read it, but basically the comment was that like the universe is gonna, like, our purpose is to learn, is to go through this life and learn. Whether that means you're learning for future lives or not, like that's totally up to your belief system. But the person I was listening to said, like, we learn in this life to help us in our next life. And I don't know how I feel about that, but the universe is going to teach us lessons. And if we refuse to learn the lesson, then it's got to get louder, if you will, more pain
Yeah.
to eventually. It's why they give the example. That's why somebody who always has bad relationships, they keep on going back to the same type of person. And the universe is like trying to make you realize you don't need that type of person in your life. But if you keep on going back to it, we're just going to make each relationship worse and worse and worse till you have that moment you realize, and then you change your life.
Yeah. I mean, look, people talk in addiction, they talk about hitting bottom, right? And it's a choice. Was that the bottom? No? Okay, we'll go deeper. You know, is that the bottom? Nope. All right, you need a louder wake up call, you know? And I think the wake up call could be incredibly subtle. And maybe the subtlest thing at all is a positive wake up call where you see a light and you move towards it. You say, yes, I want more of that.
I want to, there's no good way to come back to career, but I want to talk about career and its impact on, our happiness and fulfillment, because I think sometimes people want to downplay how important being in the right career really is, because it's, it's a means to an end. It provides for your family. You don't have to love it, but we spend so much time doing it. And for a lot of people, it becomes our identity, that it really is important to address the career that you're in. And if you're not happy doing something about it, you do executive coaching, you're coaching people who are had, lots of levels of success, however we define that. But career is a very center part of it. And
Yeah.
how do we get people to accept that career really is that important, and that we should focus more attention and awareness to it to make sure we have it aligned? And I think a career can align in a couple ways. It can be your life's purpose, like it can be your life's work, and that's what you're doing. Or I do think career can be something that is a means to an end. And because of whether it's the income or the flexibility or the connections, it allows you to go do the thing that is your purpose, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think everybody's career has to be your purpose. It can be, but the career needs to feed the purpose and not take away from it.
Yeah. I mean, look, for me, the second I realized that we spend the vast majority of our waking hours in our careers, for the middle chunk of our life at least, it became blindingly obvious that we have to believe in what we're doing or we're going to be sick. And more so, I think the world is going to be sick because we live in a time where human beings' behavior affects the entire planet. We now realize that, like whether it's the environment or the topsoil or other species or the air quality, whatever you want to say, we're doing things that are out of integrity, ruining the planet. And we're suffering. It's not fun, you know? If you're doing something you don't believe in, your whole self cannot be present there. And so it's a violence against you personally. And so I don't really care if you want to save the planet. I think you can focus on being incredibly selfish and get to the exact same place. But I do think, look, if you can't feed your family, take any fucking job you can get to feed your family because that is your purpose. And I've worked blue collar jobs for a very long time, and I was trying to figure out how to support myself, and I felt great about it. But the moment I felt like I had the opportunity to do something bigger and I had choice, not taking it became painful, and a disservice to myself and my gifts and the planet, I believe. And so I think, look, if you're living for the weekends and hating your job, you're probably wasting your life. you know Now, could you have a purpose that exists outside of work? Of course. But I think you have to be careful not to lead a double life where the two are in conflict with each other. I've talked, you may have heard me talk about this before. Like, I had a moment where I was flying from LaGuardia in New York to Buffalo, New York. Quick little business trip, right? You've heard this. And like, and basically the plane landed. It's all full of people going to business meetings, and everybody takes out two phones, and it's their personal phone and their work phone. And I remember just looking at this and being like, oh, this is the schism everyone has in their life. It's like when you go to work, you don't have emotions, you don't have kids, you don't have hopes, you don't have dreams. And then when you come home, you don't really talk about what you're doing at work because it doesn't land well and nobody really cares. And I think that sickness is why we have, unbelievable amounts of waste, products that people don't enjoy. I think we need everyone to show up fully at work. Like, if you can show up at work and your spiritual life is respected and your emotional life is respected and your children are respected, then great. I don't care if you say this is like my ultimate purpose, but at least my whole self gets to be there. And if not, I wonder, like, what does it take for you to turn off part of yourself all day long? And I often talk about this as an autoimmune condition. I think spontaneity is a hallmark of mental health. So if you can just be who you are naturally without having this like super ego, these interjections that like judge everything that's coming up and say, no, that's not appropriate. That's not lovable. People won't like you if you're yourself. You better put on this persona and that mask. Then part of you wants to move forward and part of you is pulling back. And that creates inflammation and exhaustion and friction and burnout and all kinds of misery. And we take it out on other people. And so I just want to see people thriving, and I think if you trust yourself, like you said, like I think you said, we each have gifts and we want to find a way to give them, and we want to find a place where they're valued. And I think it's hard for people to trust that, like, I don't know, maybe the kid they were when they were 2 who was super excitable, got really enthusiastic and was told, sit down, be quiet, stay in your seat. Like maybe that's what the world actually needs, is that enthusiasm and that excitement. And maybe that can't happen in a corporate job the way you have it right now. So maybe we need to like blow up our idea of what corporate America is and rebuild that. And so I don't know. I'm I have an appetite for probably more disruption. I'm more disagreeable than most people. But I think, again, it's like, are we going to choose to disrupt things proactively, or are we going to wait for the world to force us through pain to have to change? Because Mother Earth's going to give us, is starting to give us some real strong messages. And some people are hearing the message and some people are ignoring it. And it's like, okay, that's not the bottom. Here's a bigger message. That's not the bottom. Here's another message. Like, wait till we run out of fresh water. Wait till we have a refugee crisis. Wait till, climate change really takes over. There's all kinds of economic issues. And like, I'm not a doomsayer. I think human ingenuity can move through all of this in a beautiful manner. But I think we have to get proactive. And I think that means people aligning their careers with their hearts. I don't think you can spend all day doing things you don't believe in and then expect a great outcome.
Hey there, just a real quick interruption. It's been a little while since I reminded you, but I want to remind you about the weekly note, the email that I send out each weekend that contains all of the daily notes, plus some curated content and some original thoughts that kind of kick the weekend note off. In addition to that, that's going to be the best place for you to keep up to date with some things that I'll be doing, drops of hoodies and hats that'll be coming later this year. Everything is flowing through the weekly note. So if you want to keep up to date with everything that's coming out about the authentic life, keep pursuing series, things that I'm doing, in addition to getting all of the weekly notes and other great content that will help you move closer to your authentic life, make sure you sign up for the weekly note. You can do that by heading over to justincastelli.io. The pop-up box is going to hit you. Put your name in there and you'll be added to the weekly note list. So again, the weekly note has everything you want and more when it comes to finding and living your authentic life. Make sure you sign up so you don't miss out on anything. All right, let's get back to this conversation with Devin. Do you find that people don't really know what their gifts are?
If they're disciplined, yeah. The people I work with tend to be highly, highly disciplined. And I've come to think of discipline as a form of self-denial. So I think there's a positive form of discipline, but I think discipline, when you're young, discipline comes from outside you, right? So if you don't do your homework, you get disciplined. If you don't clean your room, you get disciplined. And I think a lot of people have this idea that like, oh, if I want to be a good person, I should do what other people tell me to do. And so those people become really good at denying their preferences. If you've ever met an investment banker working 100 hours a week, these people are unbelievably talented at ignoring their desire for sleep, their desire for friendship, their desire for hobbies, their desire for creativity and spirituality, and they become work machines, And so that's a violence against the self. Now, obviously, there are people who are undisciplined and can't get a damn thing done who could use some more discipline. But in that sense, at one point I was looking up the origin of the word discipline, and I found it was related to disciple. And I started realizing that discipline is to be a disciple unto yourself. So when my higher self says, you should get up in the morning and meditate and hike the mountain, now I can surrender to that. And that's a form of discipline. But when I step back and look at that from the highest level of consciousness, I'm happy with that. And so if I'm slightly cranky in the morning and I want to skip my meditation, but I push myself a little bit and say, this is good for you. And then after doing it, I agree. And I say, oh, I'm so glad I did that. I'm constantly checking in with myself. That's a beautiful form of discipline. But yeah, if you're just working long hours because other people tell you it's valuable, you think you'll be lovable if you can get a promotion or a bigger car or, a bigger house or something, then I think that's a toxic form of discipline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. There's that. And I also think that going back to kind of like the discipline comes from outside when we're younger and outside influences, people being told, you go back to the kid who's energetic and being told to sit down, that their gifts aren't gifts, or that you can't follow your passions. Like I hate when people say, don't follow your passion. I understand that maybe not everybody's passion is what they should pour everything into, but I think that passions are a great guide to the things that we should be doing. Now, to what scope and how big it becomes, that depends on the person. But I think saying, go into a career that you're good at and you'll develop passion, while it could be true, and truthfully, I'm an example of that. Like I didn't go to school to become a financial advisor. I had one finance class. I got a C in it because I didn't even care about it. I stumbled into the business, and what really pulled me into it was the relationship side of things. And then I learned everything else and I developed a passion for it. So while that is true, and that's my story, I don't believe that that's the only way to go. That for some people, following their passion, which is now what I do, and that provides me as my guide, it will take you to where you need to be. So I guess the point of bringing that up is so many people have had their gifts minimized, that they don't believe in it, and they don't have the ability, without working with someone like you or who does this type of work, to trust that that gift really is a gift and it should be shared with the world, and it will lead them to where they want to go, whether that be greater prosperity or happiness. I think one of the quotes you said on another podcast was that like all of the answers are within. So whether that is the answer to what your gifts are, or even that like what should I do, like we already know what we should do. So the point of that ramble is for the people who have been told they can't pursue the thing they want, how would you help them overcome those narratives?
I mean, I think the only way to overcome it is through action. And I just think you have to recognize that it's not a black and white. It's not all or nothing. There's baby steps, right? So I'm often getting people to spend a little time on their hobbies, a little time introspecting, getting in touch with themselves. I mean, the first step is usually, have you lost touch with it completely? And do we need to start there? Do we need to start to get you just pay attention to your energy sometimes? Like, oh, when I talk to this person, I get more energy, and this person, I get less energy. Okay, this activity, more energy, that activity, less energy. Let's just start to honor that. Trust that. Let's believe that that is real valuable information. That's not noise. If you're too disciplined, you ignore all that, and you just, well, someone else said I should do it, so I'm going to do it, but it's fascinating when people start to align themselves with their energy. Things do start, synchronicities happen. What's happening is you're getting in sync with your environment. Your body is helping you get in sync with your environment. I don't think we don't have to go to some magical place to explain synchronicities. It's like you're either numb and out of tune, or you're highly refining your sensitivity to the environment, in which case you start to really be in sync with it. And it's as if the world is happening for you, because you are taking part in the world. It's like, try to surf backwards in the ocean. Like, try to surf so you're heading away from the beach. Like, it's just not going to work no matter how disciplined and hard you paddle. It's just all struggle, and you end up back on the beach. And then you turn around and you go the other direction, and you go, oh my God, the world's conspiring for my benefit. And it's like, well, sure, but you're also just paying attention, and you're being in sync, and you're going with the flow. And so I think, energy is flowing through you. Are you willing to respect that?
Going back, awareness again. Where is your interest? What are the energy goes? Awareness of what's going on. I think awareness is going to have to be somewhere in the title of this podcast episode. I love
Yeah.
synchronicity.
And passion is not, want to discredit passion, act like it's some dissociative state of self-indulgence
Mm-hmm.
that has nothing to do with providing value for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, everyone just can't make money sitting at home drawing pictures. And it's like, if you try to be an artist, you have to be deeply engaged with the world. You're in communication with other people.
Mm-hmm.
You're so in sync with with economics, in relationships. And it's not radically, I think there's adolescent artist syndrome. It's like what I like to call it is the belief, like, if I have a beautiful voice, I should be discovered. If I draw pretty pictures, I should be discovered. Like,
Mm-hmm.
someone should rip me out of my home and make me famous.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's absurd. It's really fucking hard to get good at anything, and it's really hard to get noticed doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're passionate and you move forward and you're willing to do difficult work, you have no idea where that will lead you. You can't necessarily be attached to, like, I'm going to be the world's #1 selling painter.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? Like, it will open doors if you fall. If you show up with passion, it's contagious. People want to be around you. They want to support you. Talent increases, opportunities increase. And so I do think you have to harness your talent. I don't think it means like the one thing you wanted to do when you were 5 years old is the thing you should spend your life obsessing over doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think you need to stay in touch with the energy flowing through you
Mm-hmm.
and be passionate. And also, I will tell you, as somebody who's in touch with my passion, I can get passionate about a million things.
Mm-hmm. I'm the same way.
Yeah. So like, that's being passionate.
Mm-hmm. And when I think about passion, and I've talked about it a lot over the last couple of years. Like I started talking about it before I found that spirit, mind, body alignment. But the way I've connected it to it is, I think that when you think of talking about what you're passionate about, whether it is human beings or things, I think, at least me, I attribute it to my heart. Like my passion flows through my heart, and I think that the heart is the direct connection to the higher power through like the spirituality. So to me, the
Yeah.
passion, which is coming through my heart, is actually coming from my higher self, my higher power guiding me towards it. And I agree with you that you never know how big something can be unless you go do it and experience it. And it's not like you can't make a good living without being the #1 artist in the world. You only need 100 true fans, and that's kind of like, you can create a good business on that if that's what you want it to be. So yeah, I just, a lot of people poo poo on passion, and I understand why, but I think it's really, really important because of the connection to spirituality, at least for me. So I appreciate you kind of um, diving down that. I wanted to go back to synchronicity real quick because I love synchronicities,
Mm,
and like I don't look for them, but I see them all of the time, even little ones like 2:22, 3:33 on the clock, like yesterday. And maybe it's because now my body is in tune with knowing when time is, but like I caught 2:22, 3:33, 4:44, 5:55. I didn't look at the clock on purpose. It just naturally happened. So like there's little synchronicities like that, but then there's synchronicities where I can think of somebody, and if I don't call them or email them within a day, they're calling and emailing me. It's been like a superpower for work. Are there any
yeah.
synchronicity stories, like maybe one that you can share? Because I want to share stories of synchronicities because I think they can act as guides or confirmations. And if you've never experienced one, maybe you don't know what they look like. So, as many stories of synchronicities we can share, I think it will help people find their own.
Yeah, and I guess we have to. I have to question here. Like when you say synchronicities, are we also just getting into the realm of psychic phenomenon in general?
I haven't read that
Because
far into that. So, this might be an area I need to go explore.
that, I mean, that's one of the big mind fucks of my life. Being raised as a hyper rational materialist atheist, one of the things it was easy for me to shit on, because if you think of synchronicities, it's like, oh, it could just be coincidences. It doesn't have to be metaphysical in any way, But then I started getting psychic phenomenon happening in my life, and then I had to really question what's going on. Like, how is information being passed around in the universe? Are we actually separate from anything ever, or is everything actually connected in a way that physics can't yet explain? And obviously, like, we've got quantum entanglement and all these mechanisms now that we can try to validate this with. But I mean, so what popped into my head, which was funny, was not actually maybe a synchronicity, but I spent a year living alone on a mountain, doing basically personal transformative work full time, and I was playing with lucid dreaming, and I was opening up to this kind of like, what is going on? Can I meditate while I'm sleeping? Can I develop more consciousness, more awareness when I was sleeping? And in a Tibetan tradition, they have like dream yoga, and they talk about dreams of karma and dreams of creativity. So two different types of dream. Dreams of karma are essentially what everyone thinks. It's like defragging a hard drive. It's like taking what happened today, and I'm kind of like filing everything into the deep storage. And maybe I'm pulling up some stuff from deep storage and like reorganizing it. And it's all kind of crazy and nonsensical feeling. And it's probably not going to be that illuminating. But they said as you burn off karma, as you develop the capacity to be present in the moment, which means I'm not processing my past, I'm not worried about the future, I'm just here. You can have dreams of clarity or creativity, they call them. And those can look like being connected to something that's happening in another place in the world or another place in time. And so one of the most profound for me was I woke up from a dream, and these dreams would feel very different. It would be like a truth had been dropped. And sometimes I wake up with my heart racing, and sometimes it was just like very emotional. And my now wife, who at the time we were kind of like rekindling our connection through love letters, I had a dream about her holding a can of mace, and it was just the most random. She was living in Manhattan. She had just moved up to like the Bronx, and so I wrote it down in my dream journal. And then the next time I spoke to her, I was like, "Hey, this is totally random, but it felt so real. I had to ask you." I was like, "On this day, does it mean anything if I said you're holding a can of mace? Like, is that a metaphor for something that was going on in your life?" And she's like, "Oh my God. My dad was worried about my new neighborhood I moved in, so he came up to visit me, and he brought me a can of mace and told me I have to carry it in my purse." And so, like, did that radically alter my life because of the information? No. The way I got the information was profound. Um, and so that to me creates an opening where I can be less arrogant and believe that I know what the world is and how it works, and a little more open to mysteries and synchronicities. And I feel like you're saying you're not looking for synchronicities, but you're certainly open to them,
I'm aware of
and
them.
you're certainly noticing them. And you're becoming aware of them. And
Hmm.
so that means like a part of you that might have been cynical before
Hmm.
has been removed, and
Hmm.
now you're actually noticing what is, and you're willing to create meaning, and you're willing to draw connections. And so I think that is what passion often feels like,
Hmm.
right? That
Hmm.
is, like creativity is seeing five different things that seem unconnected, and all of a sudden seeing the connections,
Hmm.
and then something new emerges from that. And so to me, it's all deeply entwined. Like, if you want to be spiritual, if you want to be passionate, if you want to be curious, then like you have to be open to things that you don't fully understand rationally yet, and they appear as synchronicities or psychic phenomenon or ideas. Like, if you can explain to me scientifically where ideas come from,
Hmm.
then like, okay, I'll surrender. But I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Have you read Rick Rubin's Creative Act?
Yeah, I actually kept it next to the chair I read in most of the time.
Hmm.
I refused to keep going. I would read like a couple chapters and I would put it down and like read another book because I wanted to savor it. I read it over many months.
Hmm. I love how he talks about like ideas, and like if they come to you and you don't act on it, it moves to the next person who might be ready to act on it. So that's why we think people stole our idea, but the idea was never ours. It just moved on to the next person.
Yeah, I like this idea of the brain is like an antenna that's receiving information. It's a sense organ. We're not storing facts in our head literally. We're resonating, and maybe there's a morphogenetic field or an akashic field or something that science hasn't yet defined, but it does appear that they float through time and space, and we can kind of harness them or we can miss out.
I fully believe that my daily note. So I think today I wrote daily note 528. So 528 days in
Nice.
a row. I don't write the daily note until I wake up. And
Mm.
I should meditate every morning. I don't. But every morning the idea comes to me, and usually it would come through meditation, but it also will come for me sometimes where if I don't have something, I'll just randomly start picking up books, and then like a quote will jump out or something, and that will spark the idea. So it's pretty cool because I go to bed every night with no stress. I don't have to worry about what am I going to write about tomorrow because I know I'm going to wake up and the idea is going to find me, and then I'm going to write it. So they do find
Have
me.
you ever just felt like has the word have you ever used the word surrender to describe that process?
Not for that process, but surrender's been a word that has come up a lot over the last 6 months, sparked by reading The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer, but surrender's been a word that I see coming up more and more. So yeah.
That's a big one, especially for people like high achievers, like people like I tend to work with. It's like the dirtiest word. It's like the scariest word. And everybody has the ego wants to think it's in control. My experience is that you don't so much let go of control, you let go of the false belief that you were ever in control. But like we were talking about being prepared for this conversation, and I was saying I really don't want to know what we're going to talk about too much because then I'll try to like be prepared and I won't be present, and I just like to surrender to whatever comes up. But like I don't actually know what I'm saying right now. The words are coming out, but I haven't thought about it before, and I'm not checking with my intellect to make sure that it's going to sound intelligent. And I think what you're describing, waking up in the morning, you're surrendering, you're trusting. You know, in the moment, the right thing will happen. And if I try to plan it before the moment, well, it's not the right thing for the moment. Like I often work with people and they get to a certain level in their career where they have like a very important audience, let's say, when they have a meeting, when they have a presentation, the people in the room matter a lot. And the way they've gotten there is by being more and more and more and more prepared. And they get to this point where they're so unbelievably good at jamming information and having a script that it becomes brittle. It's like they thought of everything. Well, what happens if somebody asks you a question? They want to go in a different direction. Now you're off script. Now you panic. And so at some point, I say, okay, you spent 30 or 40 or 50 years being prepared. Isn't that enough? Do you really need to spend the last like 24 hours jamming new information into your head? Can't you just show up in the room and try to be present as yourself? Isn't that probably going to produce better results? And then you can be spontaneous. And if somebody asks a question and you don't know the answer, I don't know, just play, talk about it, see what happens. And I find that's a transition for a lot of people that changes the tone of your life immensely. Like, how much fun is it to wake up and be like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to write. I'm just going to like be curious and look around the room, and then something will like energetically like feel relevant, and you just go with it.
And even the whole process of it started completely random. It started, we went to Marco Island for New Year's. I decided one year I didn't want to be in Indiana anymore for New Year's. So I want to go somewhere warm. So we were at Marco Island. I went down to the beach, meditated, and then I never would take notes after meditation, but I started taking some notes. And then later in the day, I got this idea that, well, those notes are pretty good. Like, let me just type them up. So I typed them up and put them on my website. And I did it the next day, did the next day. And then like, that's how it came to be. It was never like I was like, I need to sit down and have a daily note. It just kind of happened by accident, and then it just kept on flowing, and now it's a part of my daily routine.
Yeah, yeah. You got, who is it? It's Seth Godin who writes a daily blog for, I don't know, what is he, like
Oh, it's
decades in now?
yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that. I didn't even think about it. On the way down to Marco Island, I listened to Seth Godin's most recent book, The Practice.
Oh, cool.
So and I don't know if he talks much about it in there, but there was a Seth Godin connection before I started writing what became a daily note that's, nowhere near his string, but kind of in the same vein.
And then like I get excited. I think, who will you become and what will your life look like 5 years of doing this, after 10 years of doing this? Like, can you imagine? Like, you work with people on investing, right? So like the most powerful force in the universe, perhaps people
Yeah,
say, is
compound.
compounding interest.
Mhm.
And that's what's fascinating about daily practice, like meditation. You almost never notice a giant leap from day to day,
Mm.
but the exponential curve that takes place over decades is phenomenal. And I think anything like this, if you do it daily, play guitar for 20 minutes every day, write for 5-10 minutes every day, anything like that, it's you can't possibly predict where it's going to lead you, and to me that's what's exciting.
Alright, I wanna ask something about something that I have an interest in, just now beginning to read and learn about, but I know it's some of the stuff that you introduce psychedelics with some of your not introduce it, but you have patients who will go through that. You've had your own experiences.
Yeah,
It's becoming more, I won't necessarily mainstream, but more accepted, especially
it's
when it
almost legal.
especially yeah, especially on lines of like trauma and PTSD and kind of depression and helping people get out of that. Um, what have you seen or how have you seen psychedelics help people figure out who they really are or work through some of this stuff?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. It has become a huge part of my practice. I don't know, probably more than half of my clients now are have. I don't facilitate, I don't administer anything, but I help people prepare and integrate
Well, the
the
integration's
experiences.
the most important part, right? Like, what's the
For
point of the
Yeah, in my
experience if you're not going to
it's
integrate it?
yeah, it's like you have a big insight. Okay, that either dies and you forget it, embody it, and spend the rest of your life living it out. And so that's the integration part. I've recently I'm starting to do some work with this group called the Center for Minds, and Ford Smith and Bruce Damer and Sylvie. They're working on using psychedelics for breakthroughs, innovations. Bruce had this amazing paper on the origin of life that has really been a revolution for, like, maybe life didn't start in the ocean, maybe it started in a really harsh environment like a hot spring. And he's come out of the closet and said, this happened on psychedelics, I got this vision. um, and he talks about the revealing after the healing. And so I've been playing with these ideas, and I kind of bucket three big buckets for me. There's healing, which for a lot of people in the beginning is the first thing that has to happen with psychedelics. Is that it's like doing therapy. Like, you're going to look at your past and say, like, what what do I need to become whole and present in the moment now? And so for a lot of people, it's very profound. It could be physical healing, it could be relational healing, it could be overcoming some traumas that happened. Once you have the capacity to stay present and to be relaxed, to surrender, to really, like, trauma exists in the body as tension, as an inflexibility, a crystallization that needs to be fluid. And so it'll prevent you from surrendering and going into the unknown. You'll want to cling and control. Once you have a certain degree of healing and you learn how to surrender, you start having the revealing, which these can be unbelievably forward looking, ideas for a business, ideas for how to like make your marriage even better, like all kinds of insights can come through. And then the third category I would say is an awakening, which is some type of spiritual insight. And these, as far as I can tell, are completely random. Like, you don't have to be healed. You can be broken or healed. Doesn't matter. You don't have to have big ideas or not. It just, you can be Eckhart Tolle, who just spontaneously had an awakening and spent 2 years, living in a park because he was stuck in a non-dual state. Or you could spend 40 years meditating and get to that same place. It's kind of like that with psychedelics. Like, there's no saying how long it should take or what should be involved. You can also just get it walking in the woods. But yeah, those are the three big buckets. And then from there, depending on the type of psychedelic you're doing, you can set intentions and really explore a very specific topic and harness and try to harvest it for insights there. But my big thing is, I always say psychedelics will show you the work. Don't go in expecting to be healed. Go in expecting to see what the healing is going to look like for you, and then to come out and maybe it means you have to make major changes. Maybe it means you need to change your perspective and just think about things a little differently. But it's going to require you to hold space and maintain that new higher level of, you know, how do we take altered states and turn them into permanent traits?
Mm-hmm. Mm,
That's usually daily practice.
mm-hmm.
It takes work.
It's a subject that I plan on exploring more. I think that I would like to I think I would like to have a journey at some point. I don't know if I'll talk about it because of, like, the stigma behind it, and I think about my clients, like, what are my clients gonna think about me? But I feel like for
Well, yeah, you
me.
have to think, who are the clients you want to have. It's funny. We both have tattoos on our arms,
Yep.
right? I used to work in the security industry, so like I designed parts of the Federal Reserve Bank's security system. Like Time Warner at the time, I was doing theirs. And when I first got my tattoos, my boss at the time bought me long sleeve shirts, and he was like, "People, no one's going to trust you." And it clicked for me. I was like, I don't want to work for anybody who's not going to trust me. And so I used to be in the boardroom giving a presentation, for some new company we were trying to sell. And I would love the moment where I would like unbutton my dress shirt and roll up my sleeves and just, and they're like, it's on dates too. So like I talk about installing positive filters. Your job, if you're dating, is to turn off every single person on the planet except for one. And if you're trying to find clients, like, do you want to lower yourself so that everybody wants to work with you? Or do you want to like put your true authentic self out there? In which case, some people who might have thought your persona was bullshit might all of a sudden go, I like that guy. I want to talk about hip hop and psychedelics and creativity and curiosity. And now those are the conversations you get to have. And this is why I talk about lifestyle integrity. It's like I want everyone to feel like their full self is allowed everywhere they go. And that means you can't hide part of yourself and then build your business, because now you're not allowed in your own business.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. Like, you use my own term on me, authentic self. Like, I talk about the authentic self a lot. I think about, like, the existing it's funny, I would have no problem sharing it if I knew only future potential clients would know about it, but it's my existing clients that are like grandparents. Like, it's less about, like, I think that they would leave me. It's that I view them as family, and, like, what would my grandparents think if I did that? And the funny thing
Well,
is,
maybe you should give them a little more credit. Maybe they'll surprise you. Maybe they're
well,
already doing it. Maybe they're inspired by you, and you can be, you know, end of life anxiety is one of the great things you can address with psychedelics. It
mhm,
massively reduces the anxiety of dying.
mhm,
Maybe you help somebody overcome unbelievable anxiety because of your bravery.
mhm. Well, I know clients are gonna see this episode, so they're gonna know at least I'm thinking about it. But
There
going
you go.
back
I
to
was
the
gonna say, I'd say
tattoos,
it's kind of already out of the bag here.
yeah, and giving them credit, like, the tattoos is a great example of that. Like, I had my first tattoo at my last firm, and the firm didn't even know I had it. Clients didn't know, and when I launched my company, I was like, to I don't wanna have to wear long sleeves in the summer, being afraid that client might drop by unexpected, so I'm just gonna let it be. And I'll never forget being invited to one of my longtime clients. He's passed away since, but they they bought a house on a lake. That was his retirement goal. That I remember the first time I met him, he had this vision, bought a house on a lake, invited me and my family down to go boating. And Don didn't know I had tattoos. And he is a assistant principal in small town Indiana, conservatives can be. And I'm like, what is Don gonna think? So I told him before, like, our last meeting when he invited me, I said, well, Don, I need to give you a heads up. I said, your financial advisor has some interesting birthmarks. And he looked at me kind of funny, and I was like, I have tattoos. And he didn't care. And I was like, from that moment, I was like, if Don didn't care, the relationship I had with him, how much I respected him, and the fact that he was who he was, if it didn't bother him, then it wouldn't bother anybody else. And thankfully, we had been working together a long time. If I would have showed up day one, maybe it would have been different. But they already knew who I was. They knew my character. They knew my ability to help them. So at that point, the tattoos didn't matter. And since then, like, the arm has been filled up, and this one's getting filled up. So I should give them more credit.
Yeah, and be willing to set an example for people that maybe you do make somebody uncomfortable. Maybe that's some cognitive dissonance. Like, I like this guy, I trust this guy. Here he is making me doing something that I don't believe in. Huh? Maybe I should be open minded about what he's doing.
Hmm. That's a good point. I appreciate you bringing that perspective. That's helpful. Um, all right. Well, we're bumping up on the hour, so I want to make sure we respect your time. And I don't know if today is one of your days where you have tennis or some other things planned, because I know you like to get out in the middle of the day.
I
Um,
do.
but I guess my final question is, you're dealing with people, and the help that you're doing is with high achievers, high levels of success, but a lot of their problems are coming back to the realization that the success, mainly monetarily, but maybe status as well, isn't
Hmm.
helping them in their problems. And I think that's I think that is something that no matter how much money you have, save, taking care of your family, like you explained earlier on, but money is rarely going to be the fix. Status is rarely going to be the fix. So, taking those people that a lot of people who might be listening, like, well, I'm never going to have their problems. So this stuff doesn't apply to me, when really they're having the same problems. They just have more commas behind their name or whatever it might be. For the people who aren't your demographic, what can we help them realize that the problems they're having are no different than those, which means the solutions are very similar as well, is what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, I mean, the what's popping up for me right now is I often have people just start to watch their thoughts. Again, consciousness, awareness. Let's make you more aware of the way you're treating yourself, and look for the word should. Should is a red flag. Should comes from outside of you. Should is how you've been conditioned by your parents, your teachers, society. It's in conflict oftentimes with wants, you know? And so when you're a little kid, before you have theory of mind, when you're a toddler, you know, a year, 2 years, you're radically egocentric. People use shoulds in a healthy way, like you shouldn't steal that toy. But once you develop compassion and you can imagine someone else's perspective, you don't need shoulds as much. But we get them nonstop, regardless. You shouldn't get tattoos. You should be a doctor. You should be an engineer. You should be a lawyer. You should do this. You should do that, and it becomes a violence against the self. It becomes this autoimmune condition I'm talking about, where we ignore our energy. We become disciplined towards the wrong things that we don't actually believe in. And so I think it's that process of getting in touch with yourself, that it doesn't matter if you have $1 billion or if you're working hourly wage at McDonald's. It's like, how are you honoring yourself, and how much are you in touch with yourself, and how much are you cultivating your passion and everything we've been talking about? You know, and honestly, it sounds ridiculous to somebody who's not incredibly wealthy, but success can be an impediment to freedom. Most people think when they add another zero or another comma, a few zeros, then they'll be free. But actually, what they end up feeling most of the time is that they have more to lose. You know, I think when the younger you are, the less you believe in what you're doing, the less momentum you have, the more you can pivot. You know, I mean, I walked away from an entire career after 13 years. Like, most people are not going to make something that drastic, but there usually are, you know, small changes you can make. Now, if you own 5 houses and you have staff and you have all of this inertia and expectations and relationships, it's even harder to unwind. It's amazing how people keep themselves obligated. Everybody seems to have this belief about like how easy life should be, and they make it that difficult no matter what. And more money comes in, more obligations on the other side. And so, like, there isn't, to me, that big of a difference between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to the way that we create our own prisons for ourselves. And so I think learning to liberate your mind, becoming more conscious of the way that you're making choices, is something everybody needs to do at every stage.
I think that's a great note to wrap up on. So, I appreciate your time more than ever. Everybody beforehand didn't get to hear me ramble about how excited I was to talk to you, but this was everything I had hoped it would be and more. As I shared with you before, I did want to share publicly. After learning about the work that you're doing, listening to you, reading, like, what the work you're doing is the type of work that I want to do going forward. So to get an opportunity to talk to you, learn from you, has been amazing. And the cool thing about it is everybody who watched and listened learned a lot. And hopefully the main thing they take away is just how aware are you and how much more aware can you be? And like, a lot of good things will come. Where, I'll have everything in the show notes, but where would you direct everybody if they want to, learn more about you, read more about you, follow you? Where's the best place to send them?
My website, lifestyleintegrity.com, and you can find me on whatever, Instagram or Twitter. I still can't say X.
Yeah, I'm still Twitter. I'm team Twitter.
But yeah, you can find me through there and reach out, join my mailing list. I don't send out very many emails, but you'll get one once or twice a year.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I'll have all those in the show notes. Again, Devin, thank you very much for your time and sharing your knowledge with all of us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
All right. How great was that conversation? If you haven't already, take a moment, put something down in the comments, and let Devin know what from this conversation you really appreciated, what helped you, what moved you forward closer to your authentic life. I think that obviously a very important key to this is awareness. Ties into consciousness, ties into figuring out where you're going, ties into finding out your authentic life. Having more awareness, I think, is one of the major takeaways from this episode. Be curious to know what other takeaways you have. Again, throw it in the comments. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And getting back to the old saying, I want to thank you for joining me on my pursuit. It's an honor to be a part of yours, and let's keep pursuing.